Welcome to Honest Conversations in Black and White. I am Scott Aniel here with Virgil Walker as usual.
Yeah.
We have not done one of these in a while.
No, we haven't, and two, I was excited to hear your intro, bro.
To meet with the intro this time. Well, since you and Darrell, who we'll
Right.
introduce in a moment, are the subject of this episode,
Yep.
we decided to let me lead
Switch
off.
it up.
Usually you're the expert at that.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, we've just been too busy to do one of these.
Exactly.
But we're going to try to do more, maybe once a month this year, and especially interview our book authors for
Yes.
new books that are coming out.
Yes.
And so we thought we'd start this year with the very first book that
Yes.
G3 Press is publishing in 2025.
For the year 2025.
Hot off the presses.
Yeah.
A Biblical Theology of Climate Change
Yeah.
by Darrell Harrison and our very own Virgil Walker.
Yes.
And we just happen to have your better half.
Yes.
Can I put it that way?
You sure can.
On the line today
that.
for this interview. Darrell Harrison. Darrell, great to have you here.
Hey guys, Scott, V, how y'all doing, man? It's good
Great,
to be here,
man.
especially
probably a
on
little
this special occasion, man.
That's right. Probably a little warmer out there than it is for us here in Douglasville.
It is. We're probably about 12 to 15 degrees warmer out here than what you guys are, but it's interesting, man. You know, obviously having grown up in the Southeast where you get all four seasons, people here think it's cold when it hits 70. So it's like,
right.
you can imagine how they're reacting when it hits the 30s.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we
yeah.
just had the Atlanta version of Snowpocalypse,
Yeah.
which Omaha over here and,
Yeah.
and me who grew up in Michigan, we're like, this is
nothing.
this is a Tuesday
Yeah.
in January.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was nothing, but the whole city shuts down.
Yeah. Tamika called it Snowmageddon. So
Yeah, Snowmageddon. And you know what's interesting? Obviously, I'm an Atlanta native, and Atlanta is such a transient city. There aren't many natives that still live there, and it's interesting though. It's interesting, given that you have so many people in Atlanta who've come from so many different places, that you still got this issue with the snow and dealing with that. You know, so it's not like that. You can't blame the natives on this because there aren't that many who are still there. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
So who do you blame? I mean, I saw my son Colin. He texted me a picture yesterday that he took at a local Walmart there in Atlanta, a grocery cart full of gallons of milk. Probably had about 20 gallons of milk.
Yep.
And therefore, for what a day and a half sort of interruption in
Right.
the routine.
A day and a half when you still could get out just fine.
Yeah.
There's no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So,
It's crazy. But all that hype over
Yep.
the Snowpocalypse is a perfect transition
Yes.
into the topic of this book. Really
Climate
excited
change.
to be promoting this really needed book. And I thought, it's interesting, Josh Bice just texted us this morning a video on Twitter. And I wanted to start with this video because I think it illustrates perfectly the craziness that is out there with regard to the climate. And so we're gonna start with this, and this will be a good jumping off point for discussing the book.
"2024 was the hottest year on record. We have already passed through the 1.5 degree that was supposed to keep us safe. Millions are being displaced, California is on fire, and 3/4 of all wildlife has disappeared since the 1970s.
This is Darwin's grave. He would be turning in his grave if he knew that we were in the midst of the 6th great extinction. Our government's plans will bring us to 3 degrees of warming. 3 degrees of warming. This will destroy everything we love. World leaders must stop burning oil, gas, and coal by 2030.
So there we have a couple of climate change activists
Yeah.
spray painting on the grave of Charles Darwin in Westminster Abbey
Yep.
and using this as an opportunity to promote their climate change craziness.
It's insane, absolutely insane on a number of levels. I think about the fact that, this is a religion. The climate change, the climate activism is a religion. And what you're witnessing in that demonstration is just that. These are people who have bowed down to the pagan ideology of climate change. And believe that they're going to get their message out through vandalism of some kind. I mean, let's throw out the fact that that's an aerosol can that she's using to paint this number on the.
She just destroyed some ozone.
Yeah.
Protest.
Let's throw that. Or the gasoline that got them from where they were to the event. I mean, the hypocrisy of it all, the chaos of it all. You know, we're going to stop burning coal and oil and all this. But this is exactly what happens when you have world leaders who over and over and over again have said that the greatest existential threat to mankind is climate change, and that we have to do something about it. It goes without saying that you're going to invoke actors like this to get out and do the kinds of things that they're doing.
Yeah, and Darrell, there's sort of an irony here with these activists on Darwin's grave.
Yeah.
Like isn't there a relationship between all of this and Darwin and evolutionism?
You know, Scott, I was doing everything in my power to not burst out laughing when I heard her sort of lament that, this is Darwin's grave. Darwin would be turning. I'm like thinking to myself, no, he wouldn't. Darwin was an evolutionist. So Darwin would have said, well, things are just running their course.
Right.
Yeah.
If the earth is on fire, this is what the earth is supposed to do. Get out of the way, stop spray painting my grave, and just let nature take its course. This is how Darwin would have thought as an evolutionist.
Survival of the fittest, right?
Survival of the fittest. So that's exactly what. So I thought there was an incredible irony there, and that woman lamenting. I mean, why would you pick out Darwin's grave? So you add to that, Virgil, that they're using an aerosol can, polluting the environment even further, and then they want to use Darwin as sort of an icon of their despondency. Which I thought that was incredibly ironic that they did.
Crazy. I mean, the first question I wanted to ask you guys is, I mean, this book, like I think all of your books, started as a podcast episode, right? Sure. And I wanted to ask, like, what was the impetus? I mean, this video is a perfect example, probably, of the craziness that probably motivated you to do the episode. Yeah. But Darrell, was there something specific that you remember when you thought, man, we need to do an episode on this, that really got you thinking, we need to address this problem?
Yeah, instantly, Scott, no and yes. And the reason I say no first is because the normal routine that Virgil and I follow when we're doing an episode of our Just Thinking podcast is every topic we address, every topic that we agree to say, hey, we think we've got something to say about this. There's a consistency, although the topics are different, there's a consistent thread that runs through our decision-making in terms of doing a topic or not. And that is because there's what I call a hermeneutical void within the church on that topic. It's the same with climate change. There was a hermeneutical void. And what I mean by that, there was a void of understanding. There was a void of how to interpret this biblically. There's a void in how to understand this biblically. So the topic of climate change really is no different than what Virgil and I did when we addressed critical race theory, when we addressed Black Lives Matters, when we addressed slavery reparations. It's really no different contextually. So no, the climate change episode wasn't necessarily unique in and of itself. But yes, it was unique in that we didn't, and this had no bearing on our deciding to address the topic in a podcast episode. But looking back, we found that there were no biblically sound voices addressing this topic.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
Virgil, you want to add something?
Yeah. As I kind of thought about this whole process, initially climate change, I thought, why is that an issue? Yeah. Darrell kind of brought it up, and I thought, okay, this is an issue for me to examine. And to the point Darrell made, as I kind of began thinking about this, how do I navigate this from a biblical standpoint? The word climate change isn't in the Bible, and so how are we gonna deal with this? And then recognizing the more and more I studied the background of how things started and what took place, I recognized this is actually a worldview issue. This is actually the manner in which people view the world. They view the world from a standpoint of absent God's sovereignty, that mankind is actually in control, that we can have some say over the temperature, whether it's 1.5 or 3 degrees higher. We have control over all of the earth, and whether it works or doesn't work, how it operates and if it should. And so when I began seeing it through the lens of a worldview issue, it became crystal clear. This is an issue about God's sovereignty and our stewardship over creation, opposed to the pagan ideology that says we are in control. Yeah. We have ultimate control and say, and that we are ultimately God. And so from that standpoint, it became evident that Christians, as it relates to this subject, are flat-footed. Yeah. We don't know how to really address this. You see a lot of Christians, because of the nature of this Marxian ideology that's infected culture. You see a lot of Christians capitulating on this issue, bending the knee on this issue, saying, "Oh yes, we have to be climate change advocates as well, and we don't want to be climate deniers." And they begin using the language of the culture. And so, as the more and more I witnessed, as I studied it, and then as we did the podcast, and then on the back end of it, Darrell, and you may want to speak to this, the response that we got.
I was going to ask about that.
To the podcast episode said to me, "Oh, this is something that a lot of people need to hear about, really examine through the lens of a biblical worldview."
Yeah, what kind of response did you get, Darrell?
Yeah, without a doubt, I can't recall the exact numbers of downloads, but I think right now we've been doing the podcast now for 7 years, and I think the climate change episode is number 4 of our top 5 episodes, our top 5 downloaded episodes over the course of that 7 years. I think Virgil touched on something that's very critical here, Scott, towards the latter part of his commentary, is that and again, let me give some context to this. On the Just Thinking podcast, Virgil and I have consistently said that our primary audience is the church. Our primary audience is trying to equip and help the church interpret and navigate these issues through a biblical lens. We really don't care what the world thinks about what we have to say about these issues, as we help believers understand what Scripture has to say about these issues. So it's very critical what Virgil brought up, is that evangelicals began using the nomenclature of climate change. So we argued in that episode that we did, we started as we normally do, trying to define terms. And I argue, and I say this in the context that every believer is an apologist. Every true believer is an apologist. So as an apologist, you have to be equipped. You are obligated, in accordance with 1 Peter 3:15, to be equipped to give a defense for what you believe. And that's exactly what Virgil and I attempted to do in the climate change episode. But once you start using the nomenclature, that's how the worldview gets into the church. That's how the ideology seeps into the church. So at the very beginning of the episode that we did on climate change, I argued that the church must, first of all, reject the term climate change. You have to reject that, because that is not a biblical, that nothing about that term, nothing about that language is biblically founded. So you have to reject that term, offhand. Don't even use the term, with the exception, of course, of conversational dialogue and whatnot. But we can't adopt that terminology. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself going down a rabbit trail, saying, well, climate change is real. Like we just heard this woman say, what she pointed out, that 1.5 degrees, that's a United Nations Agenda 2030 target, to where they want to eliminate use of fossil fuels. They want to stop people from eating meat in order to reach their 1.5 worldwide global temperature reduction. Otherwise, we're all going to burn to death. I'm surprised she wasn't holding a talking points paper that said United Nations talking points across the front. But we addressed this in the episode and in the book. So we have to educate ourselves. As an apologist, Christianity involves the mind. It involves the mind. And we have to be courageous enough to confront, and I know we're going to get into this later, to confront the errors, to confront the lies of the culture that is trying to invade and like watercolors come into the church and blend in with the church and what the church holds to be true. And that's why we did that episode, to equip believers to understand what this is and how dangerous it is, not just to the church, but to the culture in general.
Yeah, I think that's so important and a really astute observation that the world really influences us by changing the language that we use and the nomenclature. So let's peel apart that climate change term. How has that word, climate, how has that shifted, the definition of that, to embody really ideas that are shifting our worldview?
I remember when I was much younger, late 70s, early 80s, it was really you were hearing stories about acid rain, right? It was all about, acid rain is going to tear up the oceans, and here's the seas and this, that, and the other. And then it was climate, or it was global warming. Right, you had the then Vice President of the United States coming out, Al Gore, saying, you know what, we've got global warming that has taken place, and the polar ice caps are going to melt, and this is what's going to happen. And then when time passes and that wasn't the case, it was climate change. And so what you've witnessed is it's not just language. The language encapsulates an ideological framework that goes with it. And so, to the point that Darrell made, you have to reject it, not because you don't think climate is not changing, but because there's a whole framework that you're adopting when you embrace that kind of language and address it from their perspective. We saw this same thing as it relates to critical race theory. It's the same kind of deconstructionist framework where the person who comes in and controls the dictionary, controls the language, actually steers culture in the direction that they want it to go. And so the same is true here. But what happened in the nature of the changing of the language with regard to acid rain and then global warming and then climate change was they got caught with their pants down, and their ideas didn't pan out, weren't right, were incorrect, and they had to come up with a different way to frame it.
Well, the thing about it,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, Scott. I think Virgil brings up a great point there. So when you talk about climate change, really what you have to do is separate the two words. So you can go out into line up 10 people today and say, okay, how would you define climate? What's the definition of climate? Forget climate change. How do you define climate to begin with? You're probably going to get 10 different responses. Now, when you talk about climate change, okay, let's say if the wind pattern shifts from north to south, is that a change in climate? If it rains today, snows tomorrow, changing climate? No, so it's climate. Forget the term climate change. The definition of climate is so subjective that you can't even land on an objective definition of climate change because nobody agrees what climate is to begin with. So, again, as Christians, we have to be astute enough to be able to exegete. Virgil and I talk about this all the time when we're traveling across the country. You have to do what I like to call exegete the culture. You have to be able to take the terminology of the culture, exegete it, peel back the layers, understand what the culture means by those words, how they define. It's not just the words, it's how they define them. And then you have to be so astute in what the Word of God says about those terms to be able to overlay Scripture over those terms and vernacular so as to come to a biblical understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, that's really good. You've talked about how this change of language embodies worldview shift. Yeah. But another really important point that I think you guys make, and you've already alluded to it, is that really this has become a religion.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what characteristics of religion have become embedded in all of this environmentalism, climate change advocacy?
Yeah.
Go ahead. V, you want to take that?
Go ahead, Darrell.
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah. So I wouldn't not to get in too deep into the weeds here, but I would not say that climate change has become a religion. It's always been a religion.
Okay.
And you're gonna see that as you read the book. We go very in depth in our climate change episode, educating our listeners on the mystic Eastern mystic roots and origins of climate change out of a religion called Gaianism, where you have centuries of earth worship, centuries of sacramental offerings to Mother Earth, right? That's what it was called when we were growing up in the 70s, right? So it's Mother Earth. You remember the old parquet margarine commercial where the woman would say it's not nice to fool Mother Nature, and then the thunder would clap and whatnot. So yeah. So it used to be called Mother Nature. Well, Mother Nature was sort of a synonym for Gaia. For Gaia, this sort of female motherly, maternal goddess who, if you saw the imagery of it, she's holding the earth like she's holding a baby. So the roots of climate change, though the nomenclature has changed, as Virgil just mentioned a few minutes ago, climate change has always been rooted in pagan religion. It's always been rooted in pagan worship of the earth. It's always been rooted in an elevation of the earth as a spiritual body, a spiritual reality, to where within climate change, the land is alive, the water is alive, everything has a spiritual aspect and dimension to it. And the radicalism of climate change is such that human beings are relegated to beneath all those things. So this is why you have such ridiculous situations, such as recently the fires in LA, where LA had no water. Their reservoirs were literally bone dry. Why? Because you've got environmental extremists there who don't want to reclaim the rainwater and save the rainwater, and instead release it back out into the ocean. Why? Not to benefit human beings, but to save the fish. So what? We're back to Genesis 2 again, back to Genesis 1 and 2, where God gave man dominion over the earth. Well, you have climate change extremists, environmental zealots in places like California who will, out of an elevation in their worship of the earth, will allow human beings to suffer as a consequence. And let me add this as well. I may be getting ahead of ourselves here, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't want to lose this train of thought. I want your viewers and listeners, Scott, to never assume that the term climate change is limited just to the climate, just to the earth. Climate change is an entire worldview that also incorporates population reduction through abortion. This goes all the way back to the 60s. Abortion and population reduction has always been a goal of climate change extremists. Why? Because they believe to appease Gaia, we must reduce the human population by billions of people, So this is now, what's this, 2025? This is at least 60 years of a worldview that has been tethered to not just what they would have you believe is environmental concern, but is more, in truth, worship of the earth. And as a result of that, in order to really appease Gaia, to heal the earth, we have to reduce the population of the earth. And abortion has been a huge plank in that objective.
One of the reasons why I wanted Darrell to unpack this is because in the book he really kind of took the lead on unpacking this religious aspect of the environmentalist.
I think it's one of the unique contributions of your guys' approach to this topic.
Absolutely,
yeah.
I do as well. So I really, and as once I learned that and walked through that, I noted that it is everywhere. You look at kids, cartoons. It's everywhere. I go back to when we were kids, Darrell. You had the Wonder Twins, right? Wonder Twin power, activate. Shape of.
You had the Wonder Twins. You had Captain Planet.
Captain Planet. That's what I grew up with in the 80s.
Yes,
you had Captain Planet. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So yeah.
So it's always been there. It's always been kind of a staple of what paganists want to infuse into culture. And to the point Darrell made, this is a 60+ year in the making kind of experience. And because it's so much a part of what we live and breathe, no pun intended, as it relates to climate change and climate activism, and it's so insidious, it's so underneath the surface. I really felt like it was important for us to put this book together. Not that we're climatologists or we're brilliant in some science or some scientific aspect, but just from a standpoint of Scripture has something to say about this. God created the earth, and there's something that we as believers can spend the time looking into His Word and have a response for. I'll mention one of the ladies who gave us an endorsement in the book, Abigail Boren. She's a doctor, PhD at the University of Georgia. After she heard our episode, reached out to me about this issue, and she's dealing with this and a number of different things in the area of agriculture there at the University of Georgia. She was fascinated by what we talked about and on the podcast, and I was a little bit kind of taken aback because here's this PhD who listened to our episode and was excited enough to reach out and say, "Hey, would you come to the come to the university and talk to me? I want to lay out for you what's going on as it relates to some of the things that you guys uncovered in your podcast," which again was just evidence that as a believer in this field of agriculture, which the climate is a part of that, the pushback that she's getting from some of the areas that she's involved in, I thought, man, if we could equip a believer like that in key spaces and places, it would be worth us taking the time to put this together.
Yeah.
It was really eye opening seeing her insights.
Let me just add this real quick. You said you're not a climatologist. The thing people have to understand is that with climate change, you don't have to be a climatologist because this is not about the climate.
Right.
This is a new age pagan worldview agenda that's being pushed by the United Nations, being pushed by the World Health Organization, it's being pushed by the World Economic Forum, and it's really eschatological in its aims, which again underscores the fact you don't need to be a climatologist. You need to be a theologian about this. This is what we need. We need theologians to address this issue. This is not about the climate. This is not about temperatures going up and down. This is about a group of elite hippies. I mean, these folks went to college. They went to college. They went to these liberal colleges in the 40s and 50s. And they still maintain this worldview now. You got people in their 80s who are calling the shots on this climate change. This is about population control, depopulation. This is about a small group of very powerful individuals who want to control your life and the way you live. So the whole climate narrative is really a smokescreen. It's really a mirage. It's really camouflage to hide. And what I find interesting, Scott, about climate change activists is that, given especially their fanaticism with depopulation, I want to ask them, who do you want to save the planet for? I mean, because you want everybody dead. You don't want women to give birth. You want them to abort their children. You don't want married couples to have more children. You want to reduce the population so that people starve to death. So who are you trying to save the planet for?
Yeah, they want to save the planet for the planet, right?
For the planet. That's exactly right. They want to save the planet because this is Gaia. This is the goddess Gaia who they're serving. So we must make sure that we have to make. Unless I want to really upset some folks with this. But I've said from the beginning that the entire push for electric vehicles is part of that scam. It's part of that scam. They want everybody driving EVs. They want to totally discontinue the use of fossil fuels. Again, going against Genesis 2. And so you have this. It's like every aspect of this that we bring up, we can point to Scripture. So no, the climate change narrative says this. The Scripture says this. Climate change says this. The Scripture says that. This is exactly why we did the book.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that the solution here is biblical and theological. Hearing you men describe this religion, I'm just thinking this is just another example of Romans chapter 1.
Yeah.
The creation, working creation.
Yes.
So let's get into some of the solution then, the biblical solution. Darrell, you've alluded to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Can you obviously our listeners, our viewers need to get the book to see the full development, but can you bullet point, okay, what are the correct biblical categories? What are the correct biblical ideas that ought to inform a Christian's view of the world, the earth, and what the world calls climate?
Yeah, I think you begin from the beginning. that God created.
You're reading my mind. You're reading
God
my. I
created
have
the
on my
heavens
notes Genesis 1:1 right here.
Yeah. You've got to. I mean, you have to begin there. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and He is ultimately sovereignly in control. I love what you mentioned earlier, Scott, about when we get out of balance with that in Romans chapter 1, when we negate our acknowledgement of God, and in His place we begin worshiping creation
It
rather
just
than the
shows you
Creator.
how much humanity needs a God, but they suppress the truth. And what
Absolutely.
else are they going to worship?
Absolutely.
Themselves and the earth.
Absolutely,
Bingo.
absolutely. I mean, those are two areas for us to begin thinking about, and then just building out a theology of God's sovereignty that we, to the point was made earlier, Genesis chapter 2, have been given dominion over the earth. Over all, all of creation's been given. God has given us dominion over, and as a result, God's not concerned that we're going to blow it up or mess it up, or it will end. It will end when He's ready for it to end. We don't have that kind of power. This whole climate movement elevates man far and above his ability, and diminish God from His throne of sovereignty. I mean, those are just a handful of areas that I could think of.
Yeah, V, again, like I said, man, you were reading my mind. I have Genesis 1:1 written right here because only Scriptures offers an explanation as to the origin of climate to begin with. And so you have to start there. You have to, at the risk of sounding redundant, you have to start at the beginning. You have to begin at the beginning. And this correlates to my and Virgil's really dogmatism around Christians being able to define terms. You just can't grasp onto a term like climate change without, first of all, asking yourself, okay, what do they mean by this? So you have to start at the beginning. When was the first climate? Well, the first reality of climate was Genesis 1:1. So you mean to tell me that a planet, which, and again, this goes back to Darwin, right? You have a Big Bang evolutionist. Okay, it's like everything came into existence ex nihilo, just out of nowhere, out of nothing. So you're gonna point me back to Darwin. You're gonna spray paint his gravesite. You're gonna lament and say that Darwin would be turning over in his grave when Darwin had no value system whatsoever beyond himself. He had no context for valuing anything. And it's the same thing with these climate change activists. If your construct of valuing human life rests with you and not somewhere outside of yourself, why should I listen to you? At that point, listen, I can offer an alternative explanation as to why we shouldn't care about the temperature of the earth or the resources of the earth against your argument otherwise. But if we're just talking past one another and we can't point to anything else or anyone else as an objective standard for why you're right or why I'm right and you're wrong, why are we even having this conversation? So you have to go back to Genesis 1:1 to have an objective platform, an objective springboard for, first of all, understanding the reality of the earth having a climate to begin with. And then you go from there. But again, the definition of terms, I just cannot iterate that strongly enough. But then again, this is what Virgil and I do on the Just Thinking podcast. We do this all the time. You have to start there.
So how then does the dominion mandate play in? Because I ask this question because I've heard Christians use the dominion mandate as actually support for Christian versions of environmentalism. I remember years ago I was at the Evangelical Theological Society, and the theme for the year was climate care, I think, or something like that.
Oh, yes.
And Russell Moore gave the plenary address, and I remember sitting there thinking, okay, he's using all of this quasi-biblical argumentation.
Right.
He's using the dominion mandate of Genesis 1:27 as really a way to get Christians to adopt climate change agenda. So what's the proper way to think? I mean, how should we as Christians care for the world or view the world?
Yeah.
How does the dominion mandate play in all of that?
The climate attaching a pagan religion like climatology or climatism, climate alarmism, to and trying to attach it to something biblical is pretty much the equivalent of what the Southern Baptist Convention tried to do when they thought that critical race theory would be a wonderful analytical tool.
Yeah.
It's the same blending of two false ideas that don't go together, and we try to wrap them into one thing. In order to adopt a pagan secularist view of a dominion mandate, their view is devoid of God. They are indeed God, and so for a Christian to understand that, recognize that, or ignore that, and then try to bring that into some biblical idea is just it's a mixing of categories that just absolutely doesn't work. It's a flawed framework. I mean that's kind of what I begin to think about as I look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me add this. I mean, listen, when I think about people like Russell Moore, I just think about how climate change with many platformed liberal evangelicals is just a fad. It's just a fad. The timing was right for Moore to dive in and run his mouth on this subject. But climate change is a fad. Listen, let me give you a reason why I say that. Prior to Black Lives Matter, was anyone within the SBC addressing race relations? No, that wasn't an issue. That wasn't an issue until BLM showed up. Then all of a sudden, everybody wants to talk about, you got the SBC convention now doing Resolution 9. Critical race theory now is an issue. You got people like Jamar Tisby, he's not SBC, but you got people like him, writing books on how to be an anti-racist. So all this stuff is faddish. This is all cyclical opportunism where it's just the latest zeitgeist is what it is. So it's critical race theory has kind of come and gone. Climate change was and is the thing still now with certain liberal evangelicals because it's just the zeitgeist. It's just a cool thing to talk about to enhance your platform. And that's what this is. Climate change is just another fad for some people. But I don't want to pat Virgil and me on the back here, but I'm just saying with the podcast episode that we did and now the book, I don't know if there's another voice within evangelicalism out there that has treated this topic so forensically as we have. I don't know of another resource out there that's done it.
Yeah. Well, as we sort of wind down here, what are Christians to do? Like, how can Christians stand up against this religion? How can we inform our friends and our relatives? What do you want Christians to do to combat this, as you have addressed in the book?
Yeah, I think my advice is go buy the book. So go buy the book. One of the things that we did uniquely with this particular book was I wanted to make sure that it was available and accessible to a large audience.
Yeah.
Toward the back of the book, we put some helps back there, a homeschool family study guide. We did a Bible study group guide in the back. And there's also a section kind of for the apologetics of this. Because as I was thinking about this, and particularly I was thinking about Dr. Boren and the college campus setting, I'm recognizing that young believers are getting beat up on those campuses as they encounter professors who've been steeped in this false ideology. I want them to be equipped. So the book, the whole point and reason for it was to make sure that believers are equipped in these areas. So there's a lot of helps in the back of that book to ensure that people can figure out what age range they fall in, and then leverage and utilize those things. I mean, the number of different ideas that we talked about in the book. We talked about the net zero mandate. We talked about the pagan issues that Darrell raised. We talked about modern misunderstandings of this and really lay out a biblical case for how we should steward creation.
Yeah.
How we as believers have a responsibility to be good stewards of the earth, but recognizing that ultimately all of the creation, I'm thinking of Colossians 1:17, it was created by and for Christ, and He holds it all together. We need to be thinking in those kinds of contexts. The climate regime, if you will, they operate on the basis of fear. We're all going to die if this doesn't happen, and as a result of that, they're trying to conform the rest of culture and society into whatever political policies that they believe are appropriate, and all of this it's a big game. It's an absolute joke. And to the question that you laid out, I think it's imperative that Christians don't duck their head in the sand. Don't look at this as this it's just coming and going. They need to be knowledgeable about it, like we did with the issues regarding critical race theory and the like. They need to understand what's going on and have a biblical framework from which to operate.
Yeah. Darrell, you said earlier all Christians are apologists, so I think you're exactly right. So speak to our viewers. How can they stand up for biblical truth in this area and combat against the worldly ideologies that are infecting us with this climate change?
Yeah, again,
discussion?
Scott, I just have to reiterate, the best way that we can do that is read your Bible. Be as well versed in the scriptures as you possibly can. So I would just add to Virgil's suggestion about buying the book. Absolutely, we want you to get the book. But I would also ask you, just as starters, go read Job chapter 38, 39, and 40. Okay, go read Job 38 through 40, and you'll already be equipped theologically enough to be able to address any argument with respect to the pagan error and heresy of climate change in the world. But again, I think it was the Apostle Paul who said that in our doing evil, we are to be infants, but in our thinking, we are to be mature. We are to be mature. So we hope, and is our heartfelt desire, that this book will help equip the church to become better theologians, better apologists, because this issue is not going away. This issue is not going away. They are trying to, this movement is trying to convert every, even in down to the kindergarten, preschool age. They are trying to indoctrinate your children through social and emotional learning, SEL, to become climate change, social justice activists. This is a reality in public schools all across America. So parents, so thankful that Virgil had the foresight to add the homeschooling dimension to the book, because that's going to be huge. This book is very digestible, very understandable. Discussion questions after each chapter. It's just a fantastic tool for becoming a more fully orbed biblical apologist around this particular issue.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that this issue really infects almost every area of our lives. And some people might be tempted when they hear this topic, they hear this book, to think maybe it's just a niche kind of subject. Right. But I want to reiterate what you have mentioned. This is something that every Christian needs to be informed in. This is not a technical scientific book. This is an easily accessible book where you men break down the issues, help Christians understand the problem, and then give the biblical solution with all of these discussion and teaching aids as well. And so highly recommended. Every Christian needs to have this book. Get it for your young people. Get it for church groups, for school groups. This is a topic that will invade every area of our lives if we're not prepared for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Darrell, for joining us. Obviously, Virgil as well. You didn't have any choice but to be here. No, but thank you, thank you so much for tackling this topic, and then for turning it into a book form, which will be very influential and accessible. But again, Darrell, thank you so much for joining us out there from the left coast.
Absolutely, guys. Good seeing you guys.
No doubt. I'll see you soon, brother.
Well, check out at g3min.org is where you can order this book, A Biblical Theology of Climate Change by Darrell Harrison and Virgil Walker. Go pick up your copy, or 2 or 3 or 10 or 12.
10, right.
Yeah.
40.
40, yeah. Pick up your copies there. Really important resource. This is shipping now, so you definitely want to take advantage of that. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Honest Conversations in Black and White. Please like this episode, share it with your friends, subscribe to our YouTube channel and other podcasting services so that you'll be notified when the next episode is coming out, which we promise will be soon.
It'll be soon.
We're going to be interviewing another book author here very shortly. But thanks for listening, and join us next time for the next episode of Honest Conversations in Black and White.